America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation. And today we are talking with the author of Land Rich, Cash Poor and rural policy expert Brian Reisinger about why family farmers keep ending up as the throwaway in America's trade policies. And is there a way to change that? Brian, welcome to Main Street Matters.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to be with you.
Just kind of bottom line it for us. Why do these big trade deals so often hurt the farmers? Which I consider, small business owners, and we represent small business owners. So I understand how kind of policy that has good intentions can sometimes hurt the little guy too.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You said it exactly right. I mean, it's all about the little guy in terms of understanding the way that kind of the who gets to the front of the line dynamic works with these trade deals. So these great big trade deals that we've had since the early 90s, which open markets is good for farmers, it's good for small businesses. But these great big trade deals, they often have a lot of big trade-offs in them where it's good for this type of grower raising tomatoes, but then someone raising beef, it's not good for, or the other way around. True for all kinds of small business sectors as well. And here's what happens. When we make these trade deals, great big companies, great big industries tend to have the contact with policymakers, the money, the influence, the involvement, the big megaphone on their own to be able to make sure that they're at the front of that line. And when you're negotiating, any business person knows in a negotiation, you have, as you said, you have a throwaway, right? You say, oh, I care about these three things, and here's the thing that I can give them if I need to, right? It's very easy for farmers or other types of small businesses to be, well, we can throw that out. We don't need to worry about that part. It gets whittled down in a negotiation. And so we have a situation where farmers, I think this is probably true for a lot of small businesses. I don't speak for all, but a lot of farmers I grew up with and that I knew and we talked to for the book, they would experience, hey, we want free trade. We want it to be open, but boy, are there a lot of unfair trade standards out there. We got to do something to have tougher negotiations. So they're stuck in between. It's a double-edged sword. They need to wipe out unfair trade standards with some tougher negotiations. At the same time, get too many tough negotiations going on and they turn into long-running trade disputes, you can get hurt because you'll be closing off markets. And small businesses and farmers especially, time and again, are not top of mind when policymakers are making these negotiations.
Give us a little historical perspective for farmers and what they have seen over, maybe since NAFTA, how NAFTA impacted them to today, and ultimately what the goal is there.
Yep. NAFTA is a great example of a trade deal that I like to say we got it backwards, which is to say it's a great big deal with many, 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 many industry sectors and products across multiple countries. So if you think about that big of a deal, it's really easy to have a trade-off, right? Somebody who's a small farmer who grows asparagus doesn't get as good of a deal as another farmer in another sector or someone in a totally different industry. There's literally thousands of interests being balanced. And so what happens is there's all these unfair trade standards built in. In the case of asparagus farmers in America are generally not allowed to sell into other countries during those countries' prime asparagus seasons, for example. But those other countries, they can sell into America year-round. So you got American farmers only able to sell into other countries certain times a year because those countries protect their growing seasons. And then these other countries are able to sell into America all the time. So American farmers face this influx of asparagus from other countries to compete with when those other countries don't face that. Should be one way or the other, right? It should be all the farmers in America and other countries are treated the same, whether it's everybody protects their growing season or nobody gets to. Those are an example of the kind of unfair imbalances. And so that's why you would hear farmers kind of embracing that, short-term pain, long-term gain thing where it's like, oh, we can get a tougher negotiation. I know it might be short-term pain. It might be hard for me, but over the long term, I can see the benefit of a tougher negotiation where we can have more fair trade deals. But again, if those negotiations spin out of control, the trade disputes get really bad, the farmers are hurt in the short term. So we need that short-term pain to be outweighed by that long-term gain. And that's the tricky thing that small businesses of all kinds, I think, get caught up in.
Yeah, I agree. And trade's been I like to joke it's kind of an interesting topic. It's become a kitchen table topic because it's so politicized, with the media and the Democrats fighting the administration on a regular basis. And so now we have kind of regular folks who've never talked about trade probably talking about it at their kitchen table. But it's really a complicated issue. And I think people don't really understand it's not just the trade tariff on the goods coming in or goods that were being tariffs were being charged in other countries, but it is those trade barriers. And that's a great example of a trade barrier that you just gave us. And I don't think people understand what some of those trade barriers can be even worse than the tariff themselves.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there are debates around the tariffs on stuff coming out of our country, and if those tariffs are too high, it closes off that market, right? There are debates on tariffs coming into our country, and if those tariffs are too high, it means that the cost of goods could be higher for small businesses trying to source across the globe, right? Stuff like that. But the other big thing, aside from those tariffs, you're exactly right, is all the things that other countries are doing that are unfair, and those are the things that we should be rooting out in these negotiations. A good example, in addition to the asparagus one, is like China. China manipulates its currency, right? China also
Mhm.
buys up a whole lot of agricultural products until American farmers are captive. For example, soybeans. China is the biggest buyer of soybeans, but then China will do that so that they have us hostage, and then they'll dump those products to push the price down really, really low beyond profitable levels. And so it's those kinds of things that bad actors are doing out there that we need to try to protect our small businesses from. And sometimes, unfortunately, the effort to protect them through tougher negotiations also means that those markets can get shut off. We saw that this past fall with soybean farmers, where we're trying to drive a tougher deal for soybean farmers to benefit in their trade with China. And China, in the middle of those negotiations, stepped away and said, "Oh, okay, we're not going to be buying any soybeans." So it's an example of that double-edged sword that exists because of these unfair trade standards that do need to be addressed, while at the same time we want to keep those markets open.
Your book, you've written about agriculture being land rich and cash poor. How does trade policy like we're dealing with now, how does that kind of reinforce that problem?
Yeah.
And explain what you mean by that.
The land rich cash poor dilemma. It's something I grew up with. I grew up on a farm in the hills of southern Wisconsin, worked with my dad from the time I could walk. And we grew up knowing that the land we were on was very valuable. It was worth a lot of money
Mm.
if you wanted to sell it, but it was very hard to make a living on it. And it was getting harder and harder each year. Costs were going up, and what the farmer can receive for their goods was not going up at the same rate. And so it's hard to make a living on it, and farm families are left trying each year to make it and worried that the next year they're not going to. And on the flip side is you can sell it. It's very valuable if you sell it, but then you sell everything else. It's not just your dad's job when you grow up like I did, but it's your home, it's your community, it's your heritage going back for us more than 100 years. Survival stories from the Great Depression onward that we tell in the book, those all mean something to us in a very big way. So people who have small businesses understand what it's like to have a family business that's passed through the generations, how meaningful that can be. For us, it's that plus the home and the land and the heritage in a very deep way. So that's the land rich cash poor dilemma. This land that's worth a lot if you sell it, but boy, you want to hold on to it. And it's dang hard to make a living on it if you can't. Here's what happens with global trade. Because global trade is so geared around opening up markets and moving as much high volume as possible, it's really driven by the bigger companies and the bigger industries. They say, hey, we need markets as wide open as they can be, and we need to move as much volume as we possibly can. What that means is, in order to compete, you have to compete on volume. Small business owners know that you compete on volume, you can compete on price, you can compete on service, quality, all these different factors. But when we have trade deals that don't factor in the little guy, what it means is that it's really all about volume. So it really pushes farms and other industries, other small businesses in different parts of food and ag, pushes them to get bigger. All you can do is get bigger And that's it in order to be able to compete. Now, getting bigger is a part of natural market economics, right? If you can buy up a neighbor because you're doing a little better than them and you can get a little bit of scale, that's good. But when scale is the only way you can succeed, that's a recipe for wiping out small business, wiping out farms. In the case of farms, we've done that at the rate of 45,000 a year for the past century, 45,000 a year. And global trade that doesn't factor in small business contributes to that dilemma that's been wiping those farms out.
Yeah, we've seen the consolidation in agriculture just being accelerated by all of these global trade policies, and that's the whole uh, uh, trying to get market share, trying to have more product, and the consolidation. What other challenges are you seeing as a result of the trade policies?
Yep, absolutely. So the other things that are going on is farmers, like a lot of your small business listeners, they have costs for their production go up. So in farming, we call that input costs. And so in addition to dealing with whether a tariff is going to close off a market or whether a negotiation around a tariff can lead to a more fair market for us, we keep it open but make it more fair, whether it's going to fall one way or the other. In addition to that, tariffs can make goods more expensive, like fertilizer, for instance. The main form of potassium is a really important nutrient to be able to put into the soil. And so potash is a form of potassium fertilizer. And we get most of our potash in America from Canada. And so when Canada and America were in their battle over tariffs, we were at great risk of the potash becoming way more expensive and driving farms out of business. Now, the administration heard from farmers about that and actually granted an exemption around tariffs with Canada as it relates to potash, try to keep those prices down. So I'm glad that we're able to have those discussions and figure it out. But it's an example of the type of risk. And so farmers, just like small businesses, are always at risk of those costs to produce being jacked up.
Yeah, I've seen the administration has either made exceptions along the way since they've started, trying to rework these trade agreements, or they've postponed some of the tariffs. I know recently they postponed, I think it was furniture, if I'm not mistaken, some of the tariffs on furniture.
Yep.
And I think that they've shown they have a lot of flexibility and understanding that there are sort of some disproportionate pains that can be caused from some of this. So I'm glad to see that because there is, as we were talking before we hit record, um, some of our small business owners have been dealing with the turmoil from the tariffs. Um, and what they've said to me is, "Look, I get it. We're not coming from a level playing field right now at all.
Yep.
And so I know what the strategy is. I understand the strategy to get there, but I have got some turmoil. I've got some increased costs. I'm dealing with some things, and some of it seems to have kind of leveled out in some areas. Are farmers starting to feel a level out feeling as well, or?"
Yeah, I think there is a bit of a level out. In the case of soybeans, which was the big example where we needed tougher trade deals to benefit family farms, and the effort to get those tougher trade deals involved the Chinese stepping away from any purchases, right? That was a huge pain point for family farmers. That has leveled out a little bit. China and America did reach a agreement where Chinese purchases of soybeans are getting back to historical levels. Now we have to hope that they get back to historical levels while making sure that the provisions of the trade deal, it always comes down to the devil's in the details at the end. We need the provisions of that trade deal to make sure that we can prioritize family farmers, put them first, and have a situation where we can wipe out some of those unfair standards. So we have an opportunity right now where soybean purchase levels from China have begun to return to normal levels, and we can hope that the pain we went through can lead to a trade deal that forces China to be a little bit more fair to our farmers, but we have to see how it shakes out. And we're coming into another growing season. Some parts of the country harvest year round. Those that don't, spring planting is not that far on the corner. It's January. Before you know it, it's March and April, and we have to hope that 2026 can be brighter here after the challenges that we endured to try to get to more fair trade.
It's in terms of like the trade, different types of trade agreements that the administration's working on, would smaller trade agreements more specific to industry or crop, would that help, with farmers leveraging internationally on some of these agreements?
I'm so glad you asked about that. That's actually one of the keys. So, when I was exploring how trade issues affected my family's farm and other family farms, I ended up talking with a number of experts. And one of the things that they said is that targeted trade can really help. So, think about NAFTA. We talked about how multiple countries, countless industries, let alone products. I mean, it's thousands, tens of thousands of products, right? Rather than negotiating those all at once, making deals with individual countries on individual crops and products, that requires a lot more negotiating, but it means that we decouple all of these interests. So, a small manufacturer's interest doesn't have to be traded off for a farmer's interest or vice versa. We can have individual negotiations. So you're dealing with just the United Kingdom on beef sales, for instance, or
Mhm.
just Mexico on tomatoes, for instance. And so when you do that, it does a couple things. One is it eliminates those trade-offs. We're negotiating on just solid ground on the one thing that we're talking about in this negotiation. The other thing it does is, if you think about it, it increases America's leverage, because America is still one of the biggest or the biggest trading partner, depending upon the situation. Only China and a few other countries can really rival America. So if you're negotiating one product at a time, one country at a time, it increases your leverage because they're not trading on a thousand different things. They're dealing with just America on just one thing. It also can be tied to negotiating with more countries. So um, over the course of the last couple of decades, usually we've only had trade deals with about 20 countries, which is kind of mind blowing. You think about, there are hundreds of countries across the globe. So what we can do is have more targeted trade with smaller deals, individual products with individual countries, and just negotiate with more countries and try to get more countries opening up new fair markets with us. And for those countries like China that maybe are dealing with this in unfair ways, we can be a little tougher with them, and we don't have to pay so dearly because we've since diversified, and we've got, just like a small business that has one customer versus a whole bunch of customers, you're better off with a diversified customer base. Same thing is true of free trade.
Yeah, and what's interesting is our federal government historically likes a one size fits all approach.
Yeah.
What I have found in delving into this trade policy and all of the conversations that have occurred, um, they seem this administration seems willing to look at smaller bites at countries or industries, or understanding that it's just that complicated, and that you cannot do a one size fits all on this.
Yeah, that's right. It's the same thing that small businesses and farmers, especially, but small businesses of all kinds, see with taxation, regulation, whatever it is. It's very easy for our federal policymakers, whatever their political persuasion, to want to try to have kind of a one size fits all cookie cutter, just an easy, clear solution. It's not always the case, especially when you're trying to make sure that small business can do what they need to do, and trade is one of many issues that have led farming to have consolidation beyond natural means. I always say, if we had just natural consolidation going on in farming or other industries, those market forces, that's something that, farmers and other small businesses can deal with. They want to compete, right? But we've got trade and other government policies on top of economic crises, on top of technological biases and all kinds of other things that tilt the scales against the little guy. And it goes beyond that natural market consolidation because of trade and other issues.
Yeah, for sure. What role should family farmers play directly in these trade negotiations? What can they do?
I think that having farmers, just like other small businesses, speak up as much as possible. Yes, through your trade associations, but also individually, piping up, making sure that people understand how these things affect you is so important. I always say to people that we need to be thinking not just about, do you support the farmer? Any politician will raise their hand and say, "Oh yeah, I've got to vote where I support the farmer." We need to go beyond that. We need to be asking our elected officials to say, what are you doing to create new entrepreneurial opportunity for our farmers? Because they're competitive, they're agile, they're resourceful, they're hardworking, and they're being wiped out by unnatural forces that basically we can't guarantee every farm should make it, nor should we. But we need to have new opportunity on the horizon for our family farms so they can pivot toward new crops and products when a market like soybeans or any other is getting challenged by global trade imbalances or anything else. So asking our elected officials, what are you doing to create new entrepreneur opportunity can be one of those keys to taking the conversation a little bit further.
Well, I mean, it's important. I mean, this is a security issue too. We need to keep our food supplies safe. We don't want to be dependent on other countries for our food or overly dependent. There are security issues here too. So we want to make sure that these policies don't disproportionately hurt our farmers.
That's right. I'm actually so glad you said that because I did some math as I was investigating these issues. In the book, we really look at the hidden issues that are driving the disappearance of our farms, and we weave that with my family's story, surviving weather and farmland accidents and economic upheaval for over 100 years. And one of the most consistent things that I saw across the board is that we have consistently, as a country, failed to recognize how close we're getting to that level of peril where our food security is at stake. So, to give you a sense of perspective, that loss of 45,000 a year, that's loss of 70% of our farms in the past century. If we continue to lose farms going forward at the same rate we did in the past, we're going to lose the rest of our farms in the next 40 years. I'm 41 years old. By the time my little girl is my age, we'll have lost the rest of the farms like the one that I grew up on. And if we get to that point, of course, we're not going to lose all the farms. What will happen is we'll have farms essentially be too big to fail. Think about what happened with the major Wall Street banks, right? How many how small of a number of large operations are we willing to trust our entire food supply with, where if one operation goes down, think about the danger that your bank account faced with big banks failing. If we don't have small family farms and farms of all types and sizes across the country supplying our food, we're gonna have the same situation where that risk you had that your ATM card wasn't gonna work, we're gonna risk in that same way a lack of ability of food in the richest country on the globe, you know? And so it's a real peril that we face if we don't make changes because these solutions will take a few years, in some cases decades, to have an impact.
Yeah, I'm glad that you are talking about this regularly because I don't think that people understand one, the trade impact, but also the security impact. I think those are two big issues that people don't understand and don't spend enough time learning about it and cutting through the politics of it because that whole too big to fail. Unfortunately, that is a default that Washington really likes because they'd rather have a few players to be able to control and create those one size fits all.
Yep.
But it's very
Yep.
dangerous, and we've lived through the dangers of the too big to fail.
That's right. It is so dangerous, and it's dangerous in any industry. You know, you need economic diversity. You need businesses of all types and sizes competing and coming up with new ideas and having many ways for something to get to a customer. In the case of family farms, what it means if we have that economic diversity and we have small as well as medium and large farms, that means we've got farms that can supply food to the national supply chain. It means that we've got medium and small farms that can sell food locally through farmers markets and local butcher shops and online marketplaces and co-ops. Got all these different options. And we actually lived through this. We lived through a huge warning of this with COVID. Everyone will remember
Mm.
that the price of food went through the roof. That was happening at the same time that farms like the one I grew up on were having to dump milk, slaughter animals, let vegetables and fruits go to waste because they couldn't sell. Why is this happening? That consumers couldn't find the food they needed, and if they could, the price was through the roof. And farmers couldn't sell their goods, and if they could, the price was in the basement. The reason was because the supply chain was locked up. So you've got these very concentrated industries that have had to get bigger because of all these pressures we're talking about. So they get bigger trying to survive. What it means is we have like one big distribution center goes down, that impacts the supply of food and the price goes up, right? And so we saw that shock, and this happens all the time. Bird flu was another thing that made the price of eggs and chicken go up through the roof. So this is happening all the time. In the case of COVID, it happened with almost all types of food, but it's happening off now with different types of food all the time. If we continue on this path and we lose more family farms, we're going to continue to see the price of food going up, in addition to the way that food is less healthy and all of this. So eventually, our food supply will be completely at risk on a level that impacts our national security. But between now and then, we're going to continue to see price spikes in food. That's why we've been seeing it. So we're already kind of getting these warning shots, and we really need to heed them.
Another crisis in the making that COVID uncovered. I mean, it's amazing how awful COVID was, but at the same time, how it uncovered these things and really opened a lot of Americans' eyes, whether it's was our schools, education, supply chain, food security, all kinds of issues were uncovered as a result of COVID because of that supply chain bottleneck that happened. And it helped us understand how dependent we were on China for our medicine, and all kinds of other things that are really a detriment to us
Yeah.
in the future.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Having the ability, I mean, global trade and being able to exchange goods across countries is good. It creates economic opportunity. It can reduce the likelihood of war, all these other things. But we have to make sure that while we're doing that, we're not sacrificing our ability to supply something to ourselves domestically. And that's where small businesses are so important. And that's where making sure we get this trade right, where the markets are open, but they're fair. So we're not needlessly wiping out farms or other small businesses. Because as we do that, we're wiping out our ability to supply our own goods to ourselves, whether it's food, medicine, rare minerals, whatever it may be. So we need that economic diversity. We need businesses, small businesses, able to compete globally and also know that they're going to have domestic markets if we want to be a resilient economy and a secure country.
I couldn't agree more. Well, Brian, tell everybody where they can go and find out more about you and read some of the things you're writing about.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find Land Rich Cash Poor in bookstores nationwide, independent bookstores, bookstores of all sizes. Also available online on Amazon and other places you can buy online. Our paperback edition came out this fall. More on me generally, I'm at brian-reisinger.com. That's Brian, Brian Reisinger, Reisinger.com. And people can find the latest on the book, but also issues I'm raising in USA Today and other places where we're trying to talk about, share the real, raw, honest stories of what's going on in farmland and how the wiping out of our farms is affecting every single American dinner table, every single American industry. So we're trying to raise the alarm bells about that. I just appreciate anybody who tries to spread the word on these issues and see what we can do to support farmers and other small businesses in this country.
Well, thank you for all you're doing. And thank you so much for taking the time and joining us on Main Street Matters today. And thank you all for taking the time to tune in. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast from, and we will be back soon with another episode. Bye for now.